Almighty God, we thank you for where we are midway through the week. And we thank you for all our blessings and your goodness and mercy towards us. As we continue this review of the study of the Third Diadochi War and World War I and going on into World War III, we just ask you to bless us and help us to make all the connections and understand, and let these things be imprinted on our minds, that we might have greater understanding as you continue to lead this movement. We pray to be able to see all the different lines and juggle them in our mind, be able to better understand where we're at today. We thank you for hearing and answering our prayer. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so I'll pull it up, but I did back up, if everybody's okay, just kind of try to go through real quick the Third Diadochi War, and feel free to jump in, anybody along the way.
Why don't you open yours up so we can see?
What was that?
Oh no, I was telling Sal to open up his thing so we can see as you're talking, to see.
Oh,
Lining. I mean, for us to see it at the same time you're presenting it.
yeah, I got to get it shared right here first. And let's see, current slide. Yeah, I got myself messed up here. Hang on one second. There we go. I think I'll be able to do it now. Okay, there we are. So I backed it up. We were on like 54, I wrote down, and we were just starting to get to our line in the application, but I just kind of want to see if we can't review here a couple of reminders as we go through it. This was the line, this is the Third Diadochi War here. And she goes through and talks about the Third Diadochi War and the Fourth Diadochi War being basically one war with an armistice in the middle. And the same thing here with World War I and World War II. They were basically one war with an armistice in the middle. And the armistice in the middle here was this peace of the Dynast, if that's how you say that. And that's what was before there. One war, and in between them is the peace of the Dynast, this peace treaty. In between them, this Babylonian War and the rising of Seleucus. So in between here, let's see if I have that right. In between them, the Babylonian War here, right here, and the rising of Seleucus. So you've got the peace of the Dynast, and on this side you have the rising of Seleucus, and then you have the Babylonian War, and then the Seleucid dynasty. Okay. So and just backing up again, you had this, there was I think it was a 10-year period, she doesn't have it marked on here, but it was a period of time here where you had war between Antigonus, king of the north, and this is who was identifying as the king of the north, and the king of the south as Eumenes during this time. And you come to the Battle of Gevin, and this is all during that breakdown of Alexander the Great. Antigonus was one of the strongest of the generals. Eumenes was a pretty strong general too, if I remember right. And Antigonus has allies, Python and Seleucus. Seleucus was not actually involved in this battle, from what I remember, but Antigonus then defeats Eumenes, and Eumenes is the one that has the silver shields that were Alexander the Great's, basically his Navy SEALs trained by Alexander the Great. And Eumenes sends out the elephants, right, in the salt plains, and the salt dust all stirs up. Antigonus gets an idea to go around and behind there and steal all of the belongings, the money and the wealth and all that, all the spoil of the silver shields throughout their careers, and takes it. they want it back, their wives and children as well, and they want it back. And so they make a deal with Antigonus to hand over Eumenes. So Antigonus, the Silver Shields hand over Eumenes to Antigonus, and then he's killed. He self-styles himself as the master of Asia. And then he goes and starts, he's acting like a dictator, and he goes and starts visiting all the different territories, and anyone that's a threat to him, he starts killing. So he then kills Python, and here he is a dictator. And this is where I get a little bit sketchy, where you get into, okay, so he is a dictator here. Oh, I remember the three allies, the Lysimachus, Cassander. Oh, let me make sure I have the right three. It was Ptolemy, I think it was, and not Seleucus, I think. I think it was not Seleucus, and Seleucus at this point, yeah, because I left out Seleucus actually flees this time because he kills Python, and Seleucus sees he's coming for him next. So Seleucus flees. So the three allies here, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Lysimachus, see the power and the dictatorship that Antigonus is being, and they give him an ultimatum. And then they go to war, Antigonus versus the three allies, and it's over these spheres of influence. Then you come to the Battle of Gaza. This was the battle where Antigonus goes in through like Coal Syria and down into Gaza, but not quite all the way to Egypt, and takes back all that land. And he puts Demetrius, his son, there to hold things up. And the generals tell Demetrius not to take on Ptolemy because Ptolemy is too strong for him. He winds up in a battle with Ptolemy and loses all that land back again. So Antigonus has to come and restore and bring him back. If I got anything wrong, correct me as we go along here. And then that leads us to here where you begin to have this rise of Seleucus again. And then this was to the very borders, the peace of the Dynas, to the very borders of Egypt, and the peace of the Dynas. Maybe if we go through here, we'll be able to read up on that one again if I scroll through the slides as we go through. So you've got the rise of Seleucus again, and then you have the peace of the Dynas, then you have the Babylonian War. This is where Antigonus and Seleucus are battling for Babylon. And at this time here, you also have the Nabateans come in, which are, well, we'll see as we continue to go through that. Okay, so that is and then that's the setting up of the Seleucid dynasty. Any comments or questions or any corrections that you need to give me?
So back in the ultimatum of the three allies, now the three allies were Ptolemy, Cassander, and Lysimachus. And I do believe the reason that Seleucus was not in the, well, I think technically he's fighting under Ptolemy. So I think he's still in the picture, if I remember correctly. He's still fighting because he fled from Babylon. He fled because when he saw what Antigonus did to Python, Seleucus fled to Egypt.
Egypt, okay, and he's fighting under one of Ptolemy as well.
Yes, he's fighting under Ptolemy.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Anything else?
No, I think we covered that pretty well.
Okay. So now let's tackle World War I, where I'm somewhat stuck. Okay, so the Third Diadochi War lines up with the history of World War I, and this is the line here we're going to do of World War I. And let's see, and we know that these two combined, World War I and World War II, or maybe she's talking about the Third Diadochi War and World War I, yeah, also come into our own history to explain it, to open it up. So the Third Diadochi War, World War I, help to explain our own line. We'll move from the Third Diadochi War into World War I. we'll give a little bit of background. The beginning of World War I is a complicated and difficult history. It's not an easy one to pin down an exact cause. There's multiple causes that led to the First World War, but I think everyone acknowledges that the ultimate cause factor was this tension between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. That was in fact where the war began. So there's been this long conflict that existed between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. And there was particularly one event that led to this war, and it's known as the Bosnian Crisis of 1908, where the situation between Austria-Hungary and Serbia escalated to a situation quite irreparable. So the Bosnian Crisis is the buildup of a problem between tension between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. And it goes into a war. Okay, so we're going to step back and just give a picture of what's happening in this history. You have Germany in the West and Russia in the East. And who is Germany? There's World War I. Germany is the king of the North. And who is Russia? Russia is the king of the South. We want to make the point that when it comes to this history of World War I, Germany and Austria-Hungary only work together. They made every step in unison. So we want to combine Austria-Hungary with Germany as the king of the North. So Germany and Austria-Hungary are the king of the North. Another reason for it being its symbology, it is a two-horned power. And we know that it's the two-horned power in this history, our history. So just an interesting detail that having two gives us, it's the rise of the United States symbolized by Germany, but you also see the destruction of Austria-Hungary. And what do we know is destroyed within this reform line? The United States is a two-horned power. So it's actually giving us more information about the fall of the United States as a lamb-like beast. And I think as we've progressed through since this presentation, we understand that it's the two horns actually go through all the way till the end, that it will act like it'll profess to be a lamb-like beast, but its practice will be of the dragon. Okay, so we have Austria-Hungary and Germany here, and they're working in unison. Austria-Hungary didn't even declare war until they had permission from the Kaiser of Germany. So you have Austria-Hungary and Germany, and they have a problem, particularly Austria-Hungary has a problem with Serbia. Serbia is this little country, but it was very ambitious, and there was all these other territories around it that it wanted to control, and really it wanted to unite all the Slavs into one territory. So it wanted to take all the Slavic states and unite them. And one of them was Bosnia, right here. And Austria-Hungary is supported by Germany. They're working in step, but Serbia is supported by Russia. So Serbia wants to get all the Slavic states united. Serbia is backed by Russia. Okay, so Austria-Hungary is supported by Germany. They're working in step, but Serbia is supported by Russia. Russia supports Serbia. Germany supports Austria-Hungary. We'll quote here about just leading up to this history. Relations between Serbia and Austria-Hungary had been gradually deteriorating, particularly from 1903. However, Russia's ability to support Serbia began to be reduced. In this prior history, Russia had been at war, and it was losing this prior history back here. Russia, Russia had been at war and it was losing, and then lost that war with Japan. In this history, Russia is in a weak state and cannot offer support to Serbia. Also in this history, leading up to 1908, Bosnian Crisis, 1905, Russia is also in this internal state of revolution. So because of the external losing of a war and the internal condition of revolution, losing the war with Japan and also internal revolution, the two issues Russia has, it lost a war and has an internal revolution. The two reasons that Russia is too weak to support Serbia. In the Bosnian Crisis, Austria-Hungary stepped in and they annexed Bosnia. So Austria-Hungary steps in and annexes Bosnia. They took Bosnia as part of the Austrian-Hungary Empire. This upset Serbia to no end. The Serbs were furious, not just because Serbian people lived in Bosnia, nor even because they had just hoped to conquer Bosnia themselves, but because they had a financial interest in Bosnia. This was able to give Austria-Hungary economic leverage over Serbia. So now you have Austria-Hungary having economic leverage over Serbia. So there's an economic reason that Serbia wants control of Bosnia. Instead, Austria-Hungary takes it. Austria-Hungary sees Serbia as a threat because it knows that Serbia is ambitious and wants to unite all of these territories under itself. This is the 1908 Bosnian Crisis. Serbia appeals to Russia for help, is willing to go to war to retake Bosnia, but Russia steps back and it won't help because it's in too much trouble itself. But because it loses and cannot back up its ally in this history, Russia is humiliated. They feel humiliated as a country that they do not have the power to support their own allies. Again, just because of the complications of this history, we'll make application directly now so we don't forget those details. So you've got the Bosnian Crisis. Austria-Hungary has stepped in and annexed Bosnia for economic reasons. Serbia is angry and they go to war. But Russia is not able to support Serbia due to its weakened condition by losing the war to Japan and also internal revolution. In the history of 1979 to 1989, there's another crisis developing. This is a history of a conflict between Iraq and Iran. Iran undergoes a revolution in 1979. They turned into the Iran we know today. Iraq goes through a revolution in 1979. Saddam Hussein takes power. This was 79 was the rise of Khomeini, right? Khomeini, is that how you say his name? Khomeini, in that church state. As a church state in Iran. Okay, so Iraq goes through a revolution in 1979. Saddam Hussein takes power. And those two newly formed identities are at ideological odds and they quickly go to war. So there's a war between Iran and Iraq in this history here. Iraq is not able to win that war. It ends in a stalemate, but they have economic problems from that war. So beginning in 1989, they have a lot of debt that they're looking to repay. And one of the territories that they want to get repayment of that dip from is Kuwait. So they want to get repayment from Kuwait because they had backed and helped Kuwait. So they want to get repayment from Kuwait. So we have this territory, Iraq. Iraq, Saddam Hussein, he did want to unite the Middle East. So if you were to look at this from our line, Iraq, she's lining up with Serbia, Kuwait lining up with Bosnia. And Saddam, he wanted to unite the whole Middle East. He was ambitious, but he could not defeat Iran. He's left in a difficult economic position and he starts to have tension with Kuwait. There's some evidence that Kuwait was stealing oil from Iraq. They had not been following the OPEC oil agreements about how you fix prices, and it was costing Iraq a lot of money. So he decided that he wanted to take Kuwait, and he stepped in there in the history of 1990 and invaded Kuwait. So Iraq invades Kuwait. So Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait, and then who steps in? The United States comes into the battlefield and they force Iraq out of Kuwait. I want to just give us a little bit of that history. The United States saw the ambition of Saddam Hussein as a threat, just as Austria-Hungary saw the ambition of Serbia as a threat. Both of them were trying to unite the territories around them into one government. So Serbia was trying to unite all the Slavic states, and Iraq was trying to unite the Middle East. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, it was too powerful, so the United States stepped in and they invaded Kuwait and forced out Iraq. They went into Kuwait. I think it's supposed to be went into Kuwait and forced out Iraq. They took Kuwait from Iraq, and they didn't just take it from Iraq. They went and really did a work to destroy the economy of Iraq. But Iraq had an old Cold War ally of the Soviet Union. So Iraq has an ally, and that's the Soviet Union. So through this history of 1989 to 91, the Soviet Union, which originally had been supportive of Saddam Hussein and Iraq going back through the history of the Cold War, is not able to support Iraq in this Gulf War crisis. So Russia is a ally, is that how you say it? Cold War ally, Russia. But Russia is in this weakened state as well, going through its own crisis of the fall of the Soviet Union here. So instead, Iraq loses Kuwait to the United States. This creates an economic problem. Austria-Hungary had economic leverage over Serbia through the taking of Bosnia. The United States had economic leverage over Iraq through the taking of Kuwait. Russia was supposed to support Serbia, but it was too weak because it lost a war and it's undergoing internal revolution. So the Soviet Union could not step in and support their ally, Iraq, because they had just lost a Cold War in the history of 1991, and they were also going through internal revolution. So in the history of the Bosnian Crisis, we see Serbia line up with Iraq, this conflict over Bosnia line up with Kuwait, Austria-Hungary lining up with the United States, and Russia's too weak and humiliated through this crisis lining up with the Soviet Union. There was in this history through this conflict, not in Serbia, but within this territory, it's actually out in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there starts to rise up this terrorist organization, and they're known as the Black Hand. The Black Hand begins to rise up as a response from the Slav population against Austria-Hungary. This is a terrorist group. They decide to strike in 1914 and assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Because of this conflict between the Slavs and Austria-Hungary, the terrorist organization comes together, calling themselves the Black Hand, and they assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand in a terrorist attack. This is what is known as the direct or immediate cause of the First World War. So the Black Hand is a terrorist group, not in Serbia, but within this territory. Starts to rise a terrorist organization called the Black Hand. Austria-Hungary then sends an ultimatum to Serbia. And here you've got, let's see, you've got the terrorist attack, you've got the Black Hand rising, and you've got the terrorist attack. So Austria-Hungary then sends an ultimatum to Serbia. It essentially says, if you don't fulfill this really impossible list of demands, we're going to go to war with you. And this list of demands was to give up your sovereignty. So Austria-Hungary wants Serbia to give up their sovereignty. So Austria-Hungary says to Serbia, through this ultimatum, you're either going to give up your sovereignty or we're going to invade you. Serbia fulfills most of the requirements in that ultimatum. They're a long way from avoiding war. So much so that even Germany and these other European countries believe that there will be no war. They think that Serbia has done enough to satisfy Austria-Hungary, but Austria-Hungary had wanted a war with Serbia for a long time. They were only looking for an excuse. So they were never going to be satisfied with anything. They were determined to have this war. Austria-Hungary wanted to have war with Serbia. Despite the fact that Serbia had filled most of the demands of that ultimatum, just short of giving up their sovereignty, it was on July 28, 1914, that the First World War began, with Austria-Hungary invading Serbia, and in a matter of days begins a war on two fronts. The Eastern and the Western Front beginning at the same time. So Eastern and Western, a war on two fronts beginning at the same time. So as soon as Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia, you see Russia start mobilizing, Germany starts mobilizing, and then it's all out war between the East and the West. Germany is fighting a war on two fronts. Germany is fighting a war on two fronts. And we explained that in a previous study. In the First World War, how Germany is here and they're fighting against Russia now, and Russia is going to war because it's humiliated in this history. It couldn't protect Serbia in 1908, so in 1914 it goes to war, and they say they're never going to let that happen again. If Serbia is threatened again, we will defend you. And when Serbia is threatened again, Russia at all costs will protect it. So Germany and Austria-Hungary fighting a war on that front, also fighting against Britain and France. So Germany is fighting Russia and Serbia, and Germany is fighting Britain and France. So Germany starts coming up with an interesting plan. This war has been dragging on for too long, and they decide that if they're going to win this war, they need to end the war on one of these fronts. They can't keep fighting on both the East and the West. So they decide to end the war on the Eastern Front through strategy. We're going to read some of the history, particularly this is the history of 1917. So there's been internal problems within Russia for quite some time. And we all know of Vladimir Lenin. In the 10 years leading up to 1917, through all this history, Lenin has been hiding in Switzerland. Lenin is a controversial figure inside Russia. He's not safe there, so he's hiding out in Switzerland. Everyone knows that he wants to overthrow the Russian government. So what Germany does is they take him from exile in Switzerland, and they put him on a sealed train, and they send him through Germany, through all the Eastern Front and into Russia. So Germany knowingly planned the Russian Revolution, taking Lenin from Switzerland in a sealed boxcar and sending him by train through to Russia, hoping that he would fulfill what everyone knew he desired in overthrowing the Russian government. And in this history, what is Lenin saying? If I take power, I'll end the war between Russia and Germany. So Germany sends Lenin, taken from exiled in Switzerland, and put him on a train and sends him into Russia, because they know that he wants to end the war, end the government, and the war end the government, overthrow the government in Russia. So Ludendorff, the famous German general, says Lenin will overthrow the Russian patriots, and then I will strangle him and all his friends. So Ludendorff is saying, in sending him, he's going to overthrow the Russian patriots, and then I'll just destroy him. There's a telegram in Berlin in a historical museum that was sent through to the German government that read, Lenin has arrived safely in Russia. He's doing just what we wanted him to do. When does Lenin take power? November 8th, 1917. This ends the war on the Eastern Front. So Lenin now takes power. Germany sends him there purposely because they know that he wants to overthrow the Russian government. And then that ends the power, ends the war on the Eastern Front. So you've got Austria-Hungary invades Serbia, July 28th, 1914. November 8th, let's go back to that. This is when Lenin takes power, right? November 8th, yeah. Lenin takes power November 8th, 1917. This is war on the Eastern Front. And then let's see. Okay, so when Lenin takes power on November 8th, 1917, he shortly after fulfills his promise on March 3rd, 1918, and ends that war. This is known as the Treaty of Breslau, the ending of the war between Germany and Russia. Germany's plan in that history was successful, but when Lenin signed this treaty, how was the treatment of Russia within this treaty? We want to read what Lenin said about that treaty to make peace with Germany, because Russia had been losing the war on the Eastern Front leading up to this treaty. Germany had all the leverage where they came to this agreement. You've got the Treaty of Breslau here, March 3rd, 1918, ending war on the Eastern Front. According to this treaty, Russia recognized the independence of Ukraine, Georgia, Finland. They gave up Poland, the Baltic states, and Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. They ceded Kars out of their hand and gave them to Turkey. The total loss has constituted some 1 million square miles of Russia's former territory. 1/3 of its population, or around 55 million people, a majority of its coal, oil, and iron stores, and much of its industry. So Russia lost a lot. Lenin bitterly called the settlement that abyss of defeat, dismemberment, enslavement, and humiliation. So even though this looks like a peace treaty, this was a huge loss to Russia. So much so, they actually lost most of their industry and 1/3 of their population. After this, extending back and through this history, Germany starts to face a problem. They're losing the war on the Western Front because they're still in this war with Britain and France. Even though they have peace on the East, that isn't enough for them to win on the West. It's been too long a war, and they're too drained as a country, and they can no longer continue. So on November 11th, 1918, known as Armistice Day, Germany finally lays down their weapons and stops the war on the Western Front. So this was Armistice Day, and this is what she's marking as well, saying that World War I and World War II were basically one war. It's all the same characters fighting, the same countries fighting, and with just a armistice in the middle. And Armistice Day was November 11th, 1918. That's ending war on the Western Front. So the Eastern Front ends March 8th, 1918, and November 11th, 1918 ends the Western Front, war on the Western Front. So does Germany know that it has lost World War I? They actually don't know. Germany in that history had this idealistic idea that it was just a stalemate, that they had lost, but the West had lost just as much. Neither side could continue, so both sides were laying down their weapons and they're going to go to the table and discuss it. So they don't actually realize how much they've lost that war. They don't realize that until 1919 and the Treaty of Versailles. And the West comes to those meetings in Versailles with such a list of demands against Germany. They point Germany back to the Treaty of Breslau, and they say to Germany, you realize how harsh your treatment was of Russia in this peace treaty, this one here. Well, we're going to make it look as hard for you as you, we're going to make it just as hard as you for you in punishment. So this Treaty of Versailles, because Germany had taken so much from Russia, the Treaty of Breslau is used as an excuse, and the West at the Treaty of Versailles takes so much from Germany, and the bitterness over the Treaty of Versailles, how harshly Germany was dealt with, the quantity of reparations they had to repay, the fleets they had to destroy, the weapons they had to give up, all that punishment of the Treaty of Versailles is what gave rise ultimately to the dissatisfaction that led to Hitler and World War II, which is why World War I led to World War II. Just as the Third Diadochi War led to the Fourth Diadochi War. At the fall of Germany, they don't realize they've lost on Armistice Day. They don't realize that until they're forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles in 1918. So World War I leads to World War II, just like the Third Diadochi War leads to the Fourth Diadochi War. We come to our line now, and we make applications. We've already made application of the Fourth Diadochi War in World War II. Now we want to make application of the Third Diadochi War in World War I, because we know that World War I plus World War II equals World War III. We must combine them to understand our own time. So we begin to do just that with this first waymark, because the complications of the war with Yemenis and the complications, Yemenis up here, and the complications of the Bosnian Crisis and the beginning of World War I. So Iraq went through a revolution, 1979 to 1989. We saw the rise of Saddam Hussein. Iraq wants to unite all of the Middle East under their sphere of influence. The United States sees that as a threat, Iraq wanting to unite the Middle East. The United States sees that as a threat. Iraq would have power over so much of the global oil supply, the world's lifeblood, and they've come into conflict over Kuwait, which we lined up with the conflict over Bosnia. Iraq's traditional ally was the Soviet Union, as Serbia's was Russia. But their ally is too weak to support them. We see Iraq in this history weakened to such an extent through this history of the Gulf War. In this history, 1990, you have George Bush stand up, starting to act like a unilateral power. He's talking about New World Order, and the United States is in control as a global policeman. He's essentially following the same path as Antigonus up here. Antigonus was starting to act like a unilateral superpower, and so was George Bush in this history. He gives a speech about what this new world order is going to look like on September 11th, 1990. He gets up and he gives this famous speech to Congress where he speaks about the world entering into this new phase of the new world order. He says this is the context of what he's going to do to the Middle East. In the context of what he's going to do to the Middle East. So some elements within the Middle East, how do they feel about that? Not very favorable to this global policeman. So a terrorist organization begins to form. So you've got a terrorist organization now that's going to form. And that's Al-Qaeda. They launched a terrorist attack on 9/11 of 2001. And why did they choose 9/11? It's not proven, but it's widely believed to be a direct response to this unilateral behavior of the United States in the Gulf War. So because of the way the United States was behaving towards the Middle East in the 1989 to 91 history, particularly marked with a speech to Congress on 9/11, then time to also make a direct attack on the United States as a superpower is timed to 9/11, 2001 by Al-Qaeda. Just as much as you see this Bosnian crisis, its lives within those territories, they see Austria-Hungary is acting like a unilateral power. They form this terrorist organization and they're going to make a direct attack against it. This is where we see this conflict begin. It's widely believed September 11, 2001 was a direct attack on the United States unilateralism, particularly in its interference within the Middle East. So in 2001, you have this terrorist attack. In 2001 here, you have this terrorist attack. And who does the United States blame for it? They blame Iraq. And the United States sends an ultimatum to Iraq. We've got an ultimatum going to Iraq. It has quite a few things on their list of demands, but one of the key demands that they that they gave in that final ultimatum to Saddam Hussein was that Saddam Hussein had to step down from power and leave the country. He's telling him to give up his sovereignty to the United States. Iraq fulfilled most of the expectations from this history, so much so that the world, the UN, thought that war was averted. They didn't think that the United States would invade, which brings us up to the history of the Third Diadochi War. There's other people that are also starting to tell the United States, hey, you're starting to act like a global dictator. Those other three in the history of the Third Diadochi War, it's Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Cassander here. In this history, you also have three allies stand up to the United States, and that was France, Germany, and Russia. So France, Germany, and Russia are saying you're acting too much like a dictator. They also send an ultimatum to the United States, and they tell the United States, they told George Bush, if you try and go to war with Iraq, we're going to block you through the UN Security Council. We're going to use our veto powers to prevent you from invading Iraq. So Russia, Germany, and France give an ultimatum to the United States, and that they're going to use their veto power to prevent them from invading Iraq. The United States is acting too much like a dictator. So connecting the history of the Third Diadochi War, we have the Battle of Gevin. Antigonus is rising as a dictator. He kills Python, his original ally. Now the United States had fought with the Mujahideen in this history, and the Mujahideen begin to rise in power. You have Python begin to rise in power. That is seen as a threat. The Mujahideen become the Taliban in 1996 and take over Afghanistan. It was not the Taliban that took down the Twin Towers on 9/11. So the Mujahideen become the Taliban, and they are not the ones that took down the Twin Towers. In fact, if you went to Afghanistan today, they sent journalists in, and as they wander around the villages in Afghanistan and ask them what they know about 9/11, many of the people have never even heard of it. The Taliban did not take part in this terrorist attack, but the United States knew that Al-Qaeda was hiding out within Afghanistan. So they used that as an excuse, a terrible excuse that's led to 18 years of fruitless war in Afghanistan. At the same time, you see Antigonus take down his former ally, Python. So the United States went into Afghanistan and they took down the Taliban, their former ally in the previous Afghanistan war, which was the Mujahideen. They were an ally here. They become the Taliban, and the United States goes into Afghanistan because they know that Al-Qaeda is hiding out in Afghanistan. So they invade Afghanistan and they take down the Taliban, even though the Taliban are not the ones that took down the Twin Towers. Afghanistan isn't enough. They also want to invade Iraq. There's two ultimatums in our history. Three allies against the King of the North, France, Germany, and Russia. France, Germany, and Russia saying stop acting like a dictator and start sharing, we're the UN, remember that. Stop acting like a dictator. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my mouse and with my eyes as well tonight. You have another ultimatum from the King of the North to its small country saying, give up your sovereignty to us. So they're telling Iraq to give up their sovereignty. So France, Germany, and Russia are saying, stop acting like a dictator and share some of your power. And also the King of the North, the United States, is telling Iraq to give up their sovereignty. So you have the United States say to Saddam Hussein, give up your sovereignty, give it to us, step back from power. When they fail to fulfill this clause, the giving up of sovereignty, you have an invasion of Serbia and you have an invasion of Iraq. So when they fail to give up here, when they fail to give up their sovereignty, and when they fail to give up their sovereignty, you have an invasion of Serbia, and you have an invasion of Iraq. This war with Iraq then begins what? Based on this application. We see that the ultimatum and the Iraq, we see the ultimatum and then the Iraq war. So you see the ultimatum and then the Iraq war. You have the Eastern Front plus the Western Front beginning at the same point in time. So you have the Eastern and the Western Front. This is World War I, the Eastern and the Western Front beginning at the same time. And here you have the Eastern and the Western Front beginning at the same time, when Austria-Hungary invades Serbia and when the United States invades Iraq. So the Eastern Front of World War I in application begins with the Iraq War in 2003. It was Russia in this history that was supposed to support Iraq and the UN through France and Germany. But Russia, back in this history of the Gulf War, had not been able to support Saddam Hussein. Vladimir Putin does not want to see that happen again. He's been in power for about 3 to 4 years now, and he's wanting to establish Russia, not yet really as this feared superpower. All he's saying to the United States is stop acting as a unilateral dictatorship. When the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, this is known historically as the catalyst that turns Vladimir Putin so vehemently against the United States. Later on, even down into our history, when people attack him for invading Ukraine, what does he say? I invaded Ukraine, you invaded Iraq. Not quite so clearly, because he claims not to be in Ukraine. I think they used Little Green Men or something where the soldiers went in, but they didn't have insignias on. Hang on 1 second. Where they didn't have the insignia on, saying where they were from. And that was where, oh, maybe I'm reading the wrong, yeah, with Ukraine. That was later when Obama was the president. Obama said, I can see what you're doing. So, okay, so I invaded Ukraine and you invaded Iraq. Not quite so clearly because he claims not to be in Ukraine, but in his own twisted fashion, that's the message he sends back. I can do what I want in Ukraine. Look what you did to Iraq illegally, because it was an illegal invasion. They went against the direction of the UN. So with the invasion of Iraq begins war on the Eastern Front. Battle of Gaza up here is also known as the Battle of Rafia. It's not the Battle of Rafia from Daniel 11, but Gaza and Rafia are interchangeable. This location of Gaza was also known as Rafia. So this Battle of Gaza fought between Demetrius and Ptolemy, where Demetrius was defeated. Let's see, this location of Gaza was also known as Rafia. So this Battle of Gaza fought between Demetrius and Ptolemy is also called in history as the Battle of Rafia. So we line that up with the Battle of Rafia down here. So the Battle of Gaza was also known as the Battle of Rafia. Rafia and Gaza were interchangeable, but it's not the Battle of Rafia from Daniel 11, but it's lined up here with the Battle of Rafia. So what do we recognize about World War II? Who wins World War II? And that was the King of the South that wins World War II. When we make application, who wins? What do we do to World War II when we make application? So you have the failure, failure, success. So we have to switch them. And we discussed that before, how the alpha history is failure and the omega history is success. World War I and World War II are the alpha history of the war between the King of the South and the King of the North. And we can demonstrate that through the counterfeit as well as through the world wars. So if this is the alpha history, then what do we switch? We switch the victor and the loser in that war. As we begin to switch this war from 2003 forward, Instead of it being Germany or the king of the north that employs this tactic, it's going to be the king of the south. So Germany, they took Lenin and said, we will send you through to Russia because you're going to overthrow the government and make peace with us. So where's she going here? Who remembers this one? Anybody?
Sure.
Is that
Well,
the
I'm
one
sorry,
where
what's the-
Russia sends Trump to the USA?
Yeah, so you've got the king of the south. You switch the victors, and so you have now the king of the south is going to do what the king of the north did in the Omega history, and send Trump in. Okay, so in this history from 2003 here, Vladimir Putin comes up with a plan. The best way to make peace with the United States is to overthrow the government. So he finds someone, he finds Donald Trump. We've already lined up their pact or alliance, or what's known as collusion.
Turn on the light.
Say that again.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so he finds someone, Donald Trump. We've lined him up, their pact or alliance, what's known as collusion, just like Germany sent Lenin into Russia. So Russia sent Donald Trump into the United States. And this was November 8th, 1917 here. And when did Donald Trump win his election? November 8th of 2016. What has he then succeeded to do? He's made peace on the Eastern Front. And this is one of the points from this study that we need to come back and discuss later. So he makes peace on the Eastern Front. How do we see this year? How do we see the Battle of Rafia here? Because in the history of World War II and most of our other histories, we see it as this war between two enemies. What World War I brings to the table is these two are enemies and now they're friends. Donald Trump doesn't start the war. Now he ends the war. And he ends the war at the Battle of Rafia in 2019. But this work came at great loss to Russia. So this peace comes at a great loss to the United States. It came at a great loss to the King of the South in the Alpha history, and it comes as a great loss to the King of the North in the Omega history. It was more than a peace, but then what do we know what's going to happen? Germany is fighting a battle on the Western Front and has internal problems. It begins to lose because of those problems. So as Germany cannot continue to fight, it's too weak leading up to this late history of 1989. So we know that coming up to Panium here, we will see the fall of the King of the South. We see that in this history with Antigonus. He marches back down, takes all that territory up to the borders of Egypt here, takes all that territory back up to the borders of Egypt itself. Sorry, I'm thinking it through for a second. Do you mind if we go over this a little bit more? So as Germany cannot continue to fight, it's too weak leading up to this late history of 1989. So we know that coming up to Panium, we see the fall of the King of the South. I think it seems like it's not fully, because this is Germany here, but you're talking about Russia here. Too weak here, Russia was too weak here. I think I get confused because she's got Germany in there. Cannot continue to fight. It's too weak leading up to this late history. And this is where, yeah, I'm confused here right now where she's got Germany. And maybe that's a typo on mine. Anybody catch that? So we know that coming up to Panium, we see the fall of the King of the South. So she's talking about Germany too weak to fight. Is that what I'm hearing? I might want to review that on the video to make sure. Anybody thoughts?
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah, was this when Germany was with Bosnia War?
Yes, I think so. Okay.
And what we just
Yeah.
read a couple of pages back?
Yes, you're right. So Germany had lost World War I more than it thought. Right. Okay. So
Right.
okay, got it. I got confused. So we see that in this history, Antigonus, he marches back down and takes all that territory up to the borders of Egypt. So we know these spheres of influence that they've been fighting over will slip out of the hand of the king of the south, and all of that territory taken over by the king of the north up until the borders of Russia itself. And you're looking at this history here, up to the borders of Russia itself, and losing all the spheres of influence. And then you start to see the decline. You get the death and the deadly wound here. Will slip out of the hand of the king of the south, and all of that territory taken over by the king of the north up until the borders of Russia itself. In the history of 1989 to 91, the United States took all of the satellite states to the borders of Russia itself. So when we find that repeated in this history from Panium to Sunday Law, we see Russia lose all of its territories through to the borders of Russia itself. Now, is Russia itself as a country going to be destroyed? No. What does it need to happen to die as the king of the south? All it has to do is lose its spheres of influence. So from Panium to Sunday Law, we see it lose its spheres of influence. Panium to Sunday Law here.
So that's what's happening now.
Right. Russia
It's being isolated.
right,
Russia's being isolated.
right.
And
And-
Putin has a real problem with the king of the north because his territory was stolen. His Russian, with Ukraine, and to see the greater Russia again.
And to see this battle as the proxy war that it is, it's a tug of war between the king of the north and the king of the south over their spheres of influence, and Ukraine is right in the middle of it.
Exactly.
And who did Zelensky cry out to today for help? Who has he been crying out to help?
The United States, the king of the
King
north.
of the north.
Did you guys hear Zelensky say that tell Joe Biden he's the king of the world? Or I don't know if I'm using that word, but the president of, did you hear that?
He definitely put him as, I don't remember the words he used either, but he definitely put him as the leader of the world. The United States as the leader of the world.
Yeah.
Calling on the leader of the world, which is really interesting because we see it's what we've known is that you see the death and the deadly wound and the death of the king of the south, and then you'll see the rise of the United States as the sole superpower. Just like you saw back here, they rose as the sole superpower and took on this dictatorship role, right? So the United States takes on this sole superpower, and I don't want to go there. I'm just thinking out loud with some stuff. But anyways, that is the rise then of the rising of the seventh head. So from Panium and then Sunday Law, we see it lose its spheres of influence. Russia itself does not have to be destroyed. That's all that's needed to weaken it to such a state that prophecy identifies it as dead, as that symbol is of dead. So in the history of Panium to the Sunday Law, we also see another lesson we can learn. So Panium to Sunday Law, which I think I just went through some of that. Yeah. This time from the Third Diadochi War, here we find lining up with Panium, there's this peace treaty, this peace made, we find between Ptolemy and Antigonus, king of the north and the king of the south, that becomes resolved. And we also mark the Nabateans the Nabateans here. So we add Islam to the waymark. Down here, you add Islam. And, or let's see, Nabateans, we add Islam to the waymark, Panium, and the Nabateans are another event at Panium. Then, because of this Battle of Gaza here, in the conflict between the North and the South, who begins to rise and establish themselves? You have the rise of Seleucus until the Seleucid dynasty is fully established. And the Seleucid dynasty, the king of the North in this history, is bringing it back to here is an alliance with the Mujahideen and the papacy. The papacy being marked by Seleucus. Papacy being marked by Seleucus, yeah, papacy is Seleucus. So if we see Seleucus, he goes into this, goes to this history. Seleucus goes from being an ally of the king of the North of the United States to dissolving that alliance to finally fighting for his place at the Sunday law history. And we describe Seleucus as the papacy. And this will be reviewed and finalized in another study. So you also have the rise of Seleucus. I think that's supposed to be over here. I got to review that too, because I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be over here, where you've got the rise. Might have to correct that. Phil, you have your chart that you did. Isn't it after the Peace of the Dynas?
Yes, yeah, so after, yeah, so King of the North to the borders, distractions, Nabateans, and the rise of Seleucus at the Peace of the Dynas. Yeah, and then, so yeah, so I think it should be, yeah, after, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm gonna have to go back and correct that. It's good. We must be getting better at like catch my own mistakes. So probably missed some. Okay, so this was I added it on because I think if I remember right, I added it on because she talks about COVID-19 and puts it on this on top of this study. I think that's what I did. So in application, we have the Bosnian Crisis that explains the Gulf War. Bosnian Crisis here that explains the Gulf War. The interaction between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, the interaction between the US and Iraq. Russia was too weak to defend Serbia because it's been experiencing internal revolutions and it's lost a war. Russia is too weak to defend Iraq because of what happened in here with 1989 to 91, the end of the Cold War. The Soviet Union experiencing internal revolution. Out of the Slavic states developed that terrorist organization, the Black Hand. And out of the Eastern countries develops Al Qaeda. The terrorist organization strikes. Austria-Hungary sends ultimatums to Serbia. Right here. United States sends ultimatums to Iraq to give up their sovereignty. Give up your sovereignty. Give up your sovereignty. Most were fulfilled, but sovereignty was not handed over. Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia. Here, invaded Serbia, and the United States invaded Iraq. And here began a much bigger war. And you've got war on the Eastern Front and the Western Front beginning at the same time. Also in 2003, there was an information war, 2003, that began to play out. This was an information war between the United States and Russia. This is the Eastern Front of World War I. So here's the Eastern Front. It's an information war of Eastern Front of World War I. This was information war between the United States and Russia, Eastern Front. It began in 2003. So 2003 begins World War III. So she's marking World War III beginning here at 2003 with this war on the Eastern Front of information war between the King of the North and the King of the South. World War I, the Eastern Front extends to 2019, or Rafia. Germany's going to end that Eastern Front by changing the government of Russia. Germany sent in Lenin to overturn the government. He overthrows the government on November 8th. And then November 8th, Trump is declared winner on November 9th. You have the election, and then he's declared winner on November 9th. But that election to vote was November 8th, and that's when he wins. So Germany sends Lenin in to overturn the Russian government, to end the war on the Eastern Front, and Putin sends in Donald Trump to eventually end the war on the Eastern Front.
So I'm a little confused.
Okay,
So when Donald Trump was elected on November 8th, 2016, that begins the war on the Western Front because he is attacking the three allies of the judiciary, legislative, and executive. So that's the Western Front. In 2016, so I'm just trying to see whether it lines up with 2003 beginning the Eastern Front.
I think the answer is, and it's confusing, is because we're looking at World War I.
World War One.
World War I, the Eastern Front. World War III begins here with the application of World War I here. So you have war on the Eastern Front begin in 2003, but it's the application from World War I. And when you talk about 2016, you're talking about the application of World War II.
Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, I got it. I see it.
Okay,
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
okay. I think I got it too. Okay. I need to see them all together. I think we're going to progress through this because I haven't reviewed these in a while. But we know that in World War I, you had the Eastern Front and the Western Front at the same time. So you have the Eastern Front and the Western Front. So the Eastern, that's where I'm thrown right now is who's the East and the West, because you got this. Well, you have the war with Russia, the information war that begins, and then you also have the war with Iraq. So which one was called the West? The Western Front, because I thought they were both just called the, let's see. You see what I'm saying? This is the Eastern Front of the World War I. It began in 2003. So 2003 begins World War III, war on the Eastern Front. But she also says that because in World War I, Western and Eastern Front both began at the same time. So World War I, the Eastern Front extends from 2003 to 2019 here. Germany's going to end that war, that Eastern Front, by changing the government. That's when they send Lenin in. He overthrows the government, and then so that's when and it doesn't end there. That's just where he overthrows the government, and then it ends here at the Treaty of Breslau, and it ends in the Treaty of Breslau, if I'm saying that right, ends with the Battle of Rafia. So you have the Eastern Front battle of World War I over. But
Right.
overlaying this, you have World War II, where this is where you have the Fourth Diadochi War and World War II overlaid. So yeah, maybe that's why it's confusing to me as well, because you've got both wars plus the Third and Fourth Diadochi Wars overlaid our line.
Yeah, because on World War I, I only see Eastern Front.
Yeah, that's why maybe we need to back up, because you also have the Iraq War. But that's where did she call this the Western Front? I'm trying to remember. We just went through that. Did she call this the Western Front?
Yeah.
What page were we on? 72. Okay.
Eastern Front.
I don't know how far back I need to go. They tell them to give up your sovereignty in Iraq. We need to see where they go into Iraq. Well, she says Eastern on both, because here it is. So the Eastern Front of World War I, an application begins with the Iraq War in 2003. So Either that or I've got a mistake here as well too. But she's calling the Eastern Front, and it might have just been confusion, I don't know, but she's calling the Eastern Front the invasion of Iraq, but later she's calling the Eastern Front. Let's see. To get this play out, this is the information war between Russia and the United States. This is the Eastern Front of World War I. So I definitely want to review that. I actually did listen to the video today, but I was working, so it's not like I get to watch it with a, really detailed. But I'm going to go back through that video again tomorrow, because then it would seem that one of these has to be considered war on the Western Front and one of them has to be war on the Eastern Front, right? But
Yeah, I'm wondering about the 2003 was also an information war.
yeah, that's what we're talking about, because
Yeah, it was
If you-
beginning to play out.
yeah, so you have information war that begins between Russia and the United States in 2003. That's going to begin and eventually evolve into sending Donald Trump. The information war is going to lead to sending Donald Trump in to be elected. But you also have in 2003 the invasion of Iraq. So you have two fronts, but she's calling them both Eastern, or I have it wrong in the notes.
Because he says, okay, right after so in 2003 begins World War III. Okay, so 2003 begins World War III. Okay,
Right.
so we can understand that. But it says World War I, the Eastern Front extends from.
Mhm.
So that's
2000.
from 2003. So that's still Eastern Front,
Right.
not the Western Front.
Right. And when we backed up to whatever page it was where she shows them the US invading Iraq, she also, I don't know, I need to review the video to make sure because it seems like one of them should be called the Western Front and one of them should be called the Eastern Front, but they're both, well, we're the West.
Yeah, but it's called,
But
here
it
it's
is two
called the
wars.
Eastern Front.
But it is two wars. Does that make sense? So I don't know, I'll have to review the video, but it is two battles. You've got between Russia and the United States information war, and then you've got Russia and the Iraq war. Does that make sense? I think the only thing that's confusing me is to have them both called the Eastern war on the Eastern Front instead of a war on the Western Front and Eastern Front. That's where I'm a little bit tripped up.
Well, I'm confused over Iraq war not being just Russian, but how does it involve the United States or King of the
The
North?
United States invaded Iraq in 2003 and
Ru-
began that war,
Okay,
and began that war in the Middle East.
okay, and then it's saying Russia. It's also saying Russia.
Right,
And
there's
Iraq.
two fronts, whether it be both called Eastern, the way it shows in the notes, regardless, it's two different wars, two different fronts. The United States is fighting the Russia, or actually not fighting, but yet, because we weren't as skilled as Russia was with information war, but an information war begins between Russia and the United States. And at the same time, you've got United States invading Iraq. So you've got the United States is battling Russia and the United States is battling Iraq. War on two fronts.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah, I got that.
So you got war on two fronts, and they both begin in 2003. And she marks that as the beginning of World War III. And she ends this war, this information war between, the information war doesn't end. We know it's information war all the way through, but it begins in 2003, but she ends that with a peace treaty. Yeah, I've got the Battle of Gaza mixed up, but they've got the Treaty of Breslau. There was a treaty in World War I, and then becomes in 2019, the Battle of Rafia. It says lost to the United States or on the Eastern Front. Okay, anybody else? I think we have that semi sorted out.
Yes, semi.
Yeah, the only thing that confuses me is to call them both the Eastern Front, but you do have the United States fighting two different wars.
Yeah, I see that now.
Two different fronts.
Two different fronts, yeah.
So Trump was sent by Vladimir Putin by Russia. It was an intentional plot to end this war. It ends at 2019 here. Harsh terms for Russia at the Treaty of Breslau. They lost so much territory, and then harsh terms for the United States in 2019. They lost so much territory, so they lost spheres of influence here. But Germany had other problems. On November 11th, 1918, they surrender. Armistice Day, Germany surrenders, but they don't think they've lost the war to a great extent. Both sides are tired. It's at the Treaty of Versailles later, they realize they have lost. It's the official end. The Battle of Panium is the defeat, but it's not the death. The war is not finally ended. Russia has to fall and then die. So at the Treaty of Versailles, Germany realizes how much it's actually lost. The war ends, or they lay down their weapons, and Germany doesn't think it's lost. So you got, I guess that's saying the deadly wound of Germany, and then realizes how much they've lost, death. So you've got Panium here, you've got the deadly wound of the King of the South, and then death at the Sunday Law. So these five wars, in history give us this here, you take that. These 5 wars in history give us this comprehensive view of the United States and Russia. It gives us the Eastern Front in 2 parts, 2003 to 2019, and 2019 to 2021. So the Eastern Front is in 2 parts because you've got World War I plus World War II. So this is World War I Eastern Front. This is World War II Eastern Front. And together they are World War III. You combine them both to understand World War III. It shows us all the way from 1989 through to the Sunday Law, the history here, all the way through to the Sunday Law. The interactions through the Middle East, through Afghanistan, through Iraq, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, the 2016 election, and it shows 2019 in 2 parts. Okay, 2019 in 2 parts. It is both a battle and a peace treaty. The beginning of a war and the end of a war. So you have the end of the Eastern Front of World War I and the beginning of the Eastern Front with World War II. The beginning of a war and the end of a war, if we had time to break that down, those 2 conflicting thoughts give a comprehensive view of what happened in 2019. So we see where all the history comes from that tells the story of our line. Is everybody following this now? I think I'm starting to get a little bit better. World War I plus World War II equals World War III. So you have here World War III begins at 2003 with tracing the line of World War I, and you have what leads to World War I, and you have what leads to this Eastern Front battle of World War III that you get from the history of World War I. And it is this invasion of Iraq, fighting 2 battles, the invasion of Iraq and the information war between Russia and the United States. That goes through till 2019, where you had the Treaty of Breslau. So it's a peace treaty. And at the same time, begins using the line of World War II, war on the Eastern Front, which is war between the King of the North and the King of the South, between Russia and the United States. Everybody okay?
Okay, so If I'm to understand this correctly, the war on the Eastern Front in World War One began with the Treaty of Breslau.
Ends with, yes.
Okay, so World War One. So World War One begins with Austria-Hungary invading Serbia. That's the Eastern Front, and the Eastern Front, World War One, ends with.
Stay right in front of that microphone.
Okay, all right. So World War One. The Eastern Front begins with Austria-Hungary invading Serbia,
Uh-huh.
and it ends with the Treaty of Breslau.
Correct.
Okay, and so World War One, there is no Western Front.
There's war on two fronts. The only thing is in these notes, unless I made a mistake, she labeled them both as Eastern Front, but it is a war on two fronts because Russia and the United States are in an information war. And at the same time, the United States invades Iraq. So the United States is fighting a war on two fronts. The only thing that I think is in question is whether or not one was supposed to be called Western. And I'll try to review that tomorrow.
Okay.
But the United States is fighting a war on two fronts, beginning in 2003.
Okay, and so in World War II, the Eastern Front, the Eastern Front begins when Germany, Hitler invades Russia.
Yeah, and that line's not here, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah, and Operation Barbarossa.
Right.
Okay.
And then what's not on this line, and I don't remember, we have a few more pages to go, but what's not on this line is the Western Front of World War II begins here. I think you brought that up. But it's not on this line.
Okay.
World War II, war on the Western Front. That's where the United States is fighting for the three branches of government. Trump is fighting for the three branches of government.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So in World War II, that would be Germany attacking the Poland and the three allies.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
And the invasion of Poland lines up with, if I remember right, the invasion of Poland lines up with Trump taking the executive branch.
Right, because that was the quick one.
Right. Okay. So are we all doing better? Are we all getting a little more skilled? I remember.
Yeah.
This is a complicated one.
It helps, so just repeating it,
Yeah.
going through it.
It's helping me more this time than it did last week. I'm glad we went back several pages to start again. Okay, so there's one other thing we want to talk about. We see World War I, and it begins in 1914. World War I, Austria-Hungary invades Serbia. Then we come down to the Treaty of Breslau in 1917. Then in 1918, the Treaty of Breslau, 1917. Then in 1918 is the Treaty of Breslau, and it lines up with Rafia. So the Treaty of Breslau lines up with the Battle of Rafia. This treaty was, what date was it signed? What month was it signed? So March 3rd, 1918. And also what began on March 4th of 1918, according to Wikipedia, March 4th, 1918, a US military facility, one of their cooks reported sick. He's the first recorded victim of the Spanish flu. Within a few days, 522 men at that camp reported sick. The day after the Treaty of Breslau begins, the Spanish flu epidemic begins. And so why is that relevant to us? Why is that relevant to us? That the day after the Treaty of Breslau is signed, day after March 4th begins the Spanish flu. Why is that relevant to us?
Because, yeah, that's when there was a peace. There was a peace treaty between King of the North and King of the South, and then shortly after, COVID began.
COVID began. So we have 2019, November 9 is the close of probation. It was the end of that dispensation. When is the first reported case of the coronavirus? So far as they've been able to trace it back to the best they can do is November 17th, 2019. Throughout 1918, beginning from March 4th, the Spanish flu ravaged the world. It was worldwide. It began directly after the treaty. The Spanish flu did not begin in Spain. It's called the Spanish flu because Spain was so shut off from the rest of the world. When it occurred in Spain, the Spanish thought that it was only occurring in their country, so they called it the Spanish flu. But it did not begin in Spain. The Spanish flu, as best as can now be understood through genetics, came from an animal source. They can't pin it to the exact variety, but the closest they can come is it was a variety of a bird. In a short period of time, it became worldwide, the most widespread epidemic in history. There's methonyms today that are looking back at 1918, and what are they recognizing? They're recognizing the same thing. 1918, the Spanish flu. In 2019, the coronavirus. This is a worldwide epidemic, and this is a worldwide epidemic. Even on a reform line, we could overlay the two. This becomes very important when we think two things. First of all, you always have a choice between two methodologies, line upon line or conspiracy theories. Coronavirus is worldwide epidemic that was not a government plot. It developed from an animal source, and it is extremely serious. We've seen those trains, the ones that have a tank, a train. She's talking about pictures. I think I might have the picture in here. A train, but it has a tank on top of it used to transport liquids or gases. There's this distant photo of this tank on a train, and underneath it said real. Written on the side of this tank was COVID-19. What he is saying is it is proof that it was created and released intentionally. Sometimes conspiracy theories are obviously nonsense. Why would one intentionally create a virus to destroy our own economy, put it in a tank, and then label the tank? If we were a master conspirator, we wouldn't label our crime so everybody can see it, and that's just foolishness. So here's the train that they took pictures of, and it says COVID-19 on it. The COVID-19 coronavirus disease pandemic of early 2020, as all such outbreaks do, generated conspiracy theories that the virus was man-made and even possibly deliberately released onto a defenseless population. And that was from Snopes fact check. In the US, railroad cars bear reporting marks assigned by the Association of American Railroads, which consists of 2 to 4 letters followed by a number of up to 6 digits and indicate ownership of the car, as shown in the following example. So it's just showing the names here that are how they label them, how they actually label them. So, but those who have rejected this message, they don't believe line upon line. So they resort to crazy theories. The Nethinims, they said we are repeating World War II and Trump is Hitler. They were correct. The Nethinims said we were repeating 1918, the Spanish flu, and they were correct. There are some differences between World War II and World War III. There are some differences with this flu epidemic. For example, this Spanish flu, it killed millions of people because everyone was so physically weakened by the World War. We are not in a hot war. The population was not weak. We are in an information war. So the suffering, I would suggest, is not so much the death count. The consequences of this virus are the information attacks. That's the war. That's where we're weak. It's destroying the European Union, NATO, the UN, people's trust in their governments, in their medical system. where it's doing the most damage is because we are weak because of the information war. That damage won't be reflected in the death count, but it's just as dangerous how this virus is being used, the damage it's doing because of information. Conspiracy theories make us weak. A trench war made the Spanish flu dangerous. The consequence there was just in the death count. What makes the coronavirus dangerous is the information war that we've been in. The consequences of the war are in these two streams of information and how it's being used. We can just see that in how Trump is using this virus. So the information war, what did the information war have to do with the two streams of information? What did that have to do with coronavirus?
Conspiracy theories.
And then what?
It's how you believe, and it puts you on the either the right or the left.
Yeah, but there's something significant that the conspiracy theories were going to cause. What were some of the conspiracy theories that we believe coming out of conservative Adventism?
That it was,
The
There was a mar-
vaccinations are,
there was the mark of the beast, Sunday law.
David said it. What'd you say, David?
the vaccinations can harm you.
Yeah. So the information war, the two streams of information, one, being the conspiracy theories, and coming out of conservative Adventism, you were totally anti-vax. And so the methodology shows us correctly that prepared us to be able the conspiracy theories, the understanding of information warfare, the understanding of the two streams of information, the understanding of the conspiracy theories in the right, showed us that to believe to be anti-vax was to believe conspiracy theories. And at the time, you had the left, the liberal side, they would be the ones that were telling you to take the vaccine. And you had the right telling you, or the conspiracy theories telling you not to take the vaccine. So we've been getting these questions. Is the virus a subject of prophecy? And yes, it is a subject of prophecy, but there's more to our line. This history is the time of trouble, this history here. And we know that it continues all the way through. It's the 7 last plagues. It's not just the coronavirus. This has been worldwide, because we know in the actual close of probation, the final close of probation, you go into the time of trouble, it'll be for the 144,000, and that's the time of 7 last plagues. So she's talking about the 7 last plagues being in the time of trouble, in this time of trouble. It's the 7 last plagues. It's not just the coronavirus. This has been worldwide. In Australia, 20% of the forest has been burned, 20%. Over 1 billion animals died. In February and March, rain finally came and it helped put out the fires, but it took massive ash and swept it into the rivers, and it destroyed the river systems. Australia will never recover. So you've got all of these different things happening, not just the coronavirus. In Africa, they're facing a locust plague. Just one of the swarms. They're facing a locust plague. Just one of the swarms is 37 miles long, 25 miles wide. If it wasn't for Trump and the coronavirus and the elections, we would hear about this. The last time Africa had this kind of plague or this kind of danger was 1987 to 1989. So there's links in there too if you want to read any of these articles. 1989 is what date? That's the defeat of the king of the South. Defeat of the king of the South began in 1987, 87, 88, 89, and then 2019, 2020 to 2021. In a number of ways, 1987, I don't know if that's supposed to be 1989, 2019, you can see multiple connections between 1989. You can see multiple connections within those histories, including the beginnings of what will lead to a financial crisis or financial crash. It's not just the coronavirus. Let's see, you can see the multiple connections within these histories, including the beginnings of what will lead to a financial crash. It's not just the coronavirus that is showing our time of trouble. We can see the virus from the perspective of the plagues. You can connect it to World War I, the Spanish flu, what's already demonstrated on our reform line. The greatest danger is not the death count. It's the danger of conspiracy theories, because people are weakened by information war. That's what we have to guard against. So I guess she's talking about the period of time leading up to 1989. And I know that 1989 lines up with 2021. Okay, I see what she did here. 1987 lining up with 2019. And bringing us to this place, this information war here. So the danger is conspiracy theories that people are weakened by information war. And this is an article, I don't think we'll read it. I don't know what time it is. Check the time. We won't read it, but you can read it. It's in the notes if you want to. There was a Washington Post article. Trump signals readiness to break with experts, his online base, the sales Fauci. Another one, America's civil religion is capitalism. Trump's coronavirus response proves it. Facing a plague, he wants us to sacrifice at the altar of commerce. The field is the world, Matthew 13:38. We understand better what this saying comprehends than did the apostles who received the commission to preach the gospel. The whole world is a vast missionary field, and we who have long known the gospel message should be encouraged by the thought that fields which were once difficult of access are now easily entered. Countries hitherto closed to the gospel are opening their doors and are pleading for the word of God to be explained to them. Kings and princes are opening their long closed gates, inviting the heralds of the cross to enter. The harvest truly is great. Eternity alone will reveal the results of well-directed efforts put forth now. Providence is going before us, and infinite power is working with human effort. Gospel Workers 27:2. Blind indeed must be the eyes that do not see the working of the Lord, and the deaf the ears that do not hear the call of the true shepherd to his sheep. Christ longs to extend his sway over every human mind. He longs to stamp his image and character upon every soul. When he was on this earth, he hungered for sympathy and cooperation, that his kingdom might extend and embrace the whole world. This earth is his purchased possession, and he would have men free and pure and holy. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame, Hebrews 12:2. His earthly pilgrimage was cheered by the thought that he would not have all this travail for naught, but would win man back to loyalty to God. And there are triumphs yet to be accomplished through the blood shed for the world that will bring everlasting glory to God and to the Lamb. The heathen will be given for his inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for his possession. Christ will see the travail of his soul and be satisfied. Arise and shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. But the Lord shall arise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. And the Gentiles shall come to thy light, and kings to the brightness of thy rising. Lift up thine eyes round about and see, all they gather themselves together, that they come to thee. Thy sons shall come from far, and thy daughters shall be nursed at thy side. Then shalt thou see and flow together, and thine heart shall fear and be enlarged, because the abundance of the sea shall be converted unto thee. For as the earth bringeth forth her bud, and as the garden causeth the things that are sown in it to spring forth, so the Lord God will cause righteousness and praise to spring forth before all the nations. And that's the end of that study. So we need to test our minds on it. But I think I got it a little bit better. And I'm glad we kind of backed up a little bit and went through World War I again before we went into the application. So we can see that World War I begins war on two fronts. In World War I, the actual World War I, there was war on two fronts, the Eastern Front and the Western Front. Germany was fighting Russia on the east, Austria-Hungary. No, Germany was fighting Russia on the east, and Britain and France on the west. And they sent Lenin in, knowing that he wanted to overturn the Russian government, and that ended war on the Eastern Front. In our line, we see that information war beginning in 2003, and also the invasion of Iraq that began the war in the Middle East. So you have the United States involved in a war on two fronts. Were you going to say something, Phil?
Yeah. I don't remember exactly what you just said, but something you just said didn't make sense.
Okay.
And I don't know what it was. I forgot what you just said, but I was looking at my notes. And
Talking about the World War I and war on the Eastern and Western Front beginning at the same time. I might have said, did I make a mistake when I said that?
well, I'm not sure whether it was a mistake or.
Was it when I was talking about Germany fighting on two fronts, Russia on the Eastern Front and Britain and France on the Western Front?
Oh, yeah, that was World War II. That's what you said. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, that's what I thought too. Again, I need to go back through this just to make sure my own self, because what's the two fronts in World War I? Because in these notes, it's World War, that's what she had on there. Let me go back and find that slide.
Yeah, because what you said was Germany fighting two fronts, Britain and France, I think you said, and then at the same time you said, and then Lenin overthrew, but Lenin was World War I, and Britain was World War II. So Britain didn't come in World War I. World War I had to do with Bosnian Crisis.
Okay. I gotta go back through this too. Let me pull up the share screen. Okay. Because this is what she had here, but maybe it wasn't, well, maybe she didn't, maybe I have it wrong. I got a lot of reviewing to do. If anybody took any notes on where I need to review, I'd appreciate the help. Because I want to check some things out myself too, but that's what she had here. Despite the fact that Serbia had filled most of the demands, let's see. Germany starts mobilizing, Russia starts mobilizing, and then it's all out war between the East and the West. Germany is fighting war on two fronts, as we explained in the previous study. In the First World War, how Germany is here, they're fighting against Russia now, and Russia's going to war because it's humiliated in this history. It couldn't protect Serbia in 1908. And they say we're never going to let that happen again. If Serbia is threatened again, we will defend you. And when Serbia is threatened again, Russia at all costs will protect it. So Germany and Austria-Hungary fighting a war on that front, also against Britain and France. I don't know my wars well enough, so I'll go back to this place on the video and try to find it.
Oh, okay. 'Cause I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember Britain and France coming in World War I. I thought it was all regarding the Bosnian Crisis.
But she marked Germany as the king of the north with Austria-Hungary.
Right.
So that's here. and Serbia is here with Russia. So it's Germany, Austria-Hungary, Germany fighting Russia. So I don't know my wars well enough, so I'm gonna go back through the video.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Anybody
thank you.
else that understands war a little bit better? Britain and France being in World War I? Because they're not in here anywhere else, other than when she mentions this, the two fronts that they're happening.
Oh,
I just looked at Wikipedia. It says World War I.
I think that's Logina, we can't hear her.
I looked up Wikipedia under World War I, and it says, known as the First World War or the Great War, was an international conflict that began in 28th of July, 1914, and ended in November 11th, 1918. And involved much of Europe, as well as Russia and the United States and Turkey, and also fought in the Middle East and Africa and Asia. Oh. So what was the question now?
Well, Britain and France, but I also know that Britain and France being the Western Front. I also, while I'm remembering what she said in some, I don't remember if it was this study, but she says that, well, yeah, it was, because when she goes through and says that they're the same war, let's see, where do I have that at? Right here. It's the Germany against the Allied forces. Germany against the Allied forces, World War I and World War II, the same war with an armistice in the middle. And we know that they fight on two fronts. Okay, so something else to look up then, just to see. Any other comments? I want to take it. Anybody, I want to write down a couple of things because I definitely want to look through this, but who remembers a few of those things? We want to look up if Britain and France were in World War I like this, as it's laid out, but World War implies that there was more than Germany and Russia, right? And I know what she mentions is she says it's the same players, but I think the same player she's referring to is Germany and Russia. But in World War II, the same players is Germany and Russia, but it's also two battle on two fronts as well. And that battle was the three allies. That's World War II. That's the one thing I remember. Anybody else remember any of the others that we went through that we were questioning? The Eastern Front, the Eastern and Western. I'm going to check that of World War. On our line, where she puts two fronts, Iraq in the Middle East, and then Russia and the Information War, just as to how she lays it out. Because she says Iraq is the Eastern Front, and then she says Russia in the US. And Russia with Russia is the Eastern Front. That I remember too. Okay, anybody else, any comments? Nobody?
well, it's a great study.
Yeah.
Get our minds wrapped around it. But it does make sense that both World War I mean, that because it does make sense that Germany was fighting both fronts, West and East, because that's one of the reasons why Hitler made a treaty with
Right.
Russia in World War II. So he would only deal with the Western with the three allies and not with Stalin.
Yeah, and in World War I, she only listed Britain and France. Poland is World War II.
Yes, okay.
The three allies. But you also had three allies in the Diadochi War, right? Let me. Yeah, you do have the three allies in the third Diadochi War as well. Because that's the same thing. You have Antigonus against the allies, Antigonus against the allies. So you have three allies in third Diadochi War. You have three allies, but what she only marked, wherever that slide was, right here, she only marked Britain and France, not Poland, or not three. So I'm not sure on that.
We'll keep searching.
Yeah. Well, I got a better grasp of it than I did before, that's for sure. So if there's a few mistakes, we'll have to go back through the video and check it out, a few of those things. But I got a better grasp, at least, of the overall picture. I finally have in my head, I think, where World War I begins, a war on two fronts, 2003, the invasion of Iraq and the information war with Russia. So the United States is fighting on two fronts. And that battle with the information war from World War I ends at 2019, where there's a peace treaty marked, but it begins World War II on our line at 2019 on the Eastern Front.
Yes.
So complicated.
Yes, complicated.
Say that again.
Yes, it is complicated, and but very, very informative, and something that we need to know.
Yeah.
Because we haven't really touched on it, but you know, with Seleucus, representing the papacy,
Right.
and Seleucus rising in power in Babylon. And we just read today from a media broadcast.
I was just going to bring that up.
Where Pope Francis is going to dedicate Russia and Ukraine.
Right.
Absolutely.
Consecrate from the Fatima, the third secret.
Yes, and someone in Fatima is also at the same time is going to consecrate. I don't remember what the word is called, but somebody in Fatima is also going to consecrate at the same time that Pope Francis is going to consecrate. So, you know, is this the rising? And I think the prophecy of Fatima is that once that's consecrated, once that has been done, then there's going to be a period of peace.
That's the counterfeit.
That's the counterfeit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be interesting.
Yeah. So that was right on time.
Yes.
For the counterfeit to make that move.
Yeah, that'll be March 25th from Pope Francis.
Yeah. So, and this is also, if I understood it correctly, it's the time of the Babylonian War. I don't know if it's not on that one. It's not in here, but I did. Oh, that's the other one I need to move, is that I really need to move the Seleucus, the rise of Seleucus, over one line. This here. So this was the Babylonian War. Where is it? I guess it's not written in here, but this is the Babylonian War here. I thought it was on one of these slides, but I'm not seeing it here. So that's the war between Antigonus. You've got the fall of the king of the south happening, right? The deadly wound and the death of the king of the south. You've got the rise of the king of the north to a world superpower, But at the same time, you also have the rise of Seleucus, and you go into this period that we're in, Panium to Sunday Law, is the Babylonian Wars, which is the war between Seleucus and Antigonus. Antigonus being the United States, Seleucus being the papacy. That's the way I understand it.
Right.
So I don't know that we really know what that looks like yet. The counterfeit making that move is part of it, but what it looks like with the United States battling the Catholic Church, don't know what that looks like yet.
Not yet.
So, would you like to close in prayer?
Oh, wonderful. Oh, we are so grateful that we have this opportunity to come together this evening. This was not an easy lesson. It was not an easy presentation. But thank you, Lord, for bringing us to this. And there are just so many lines, World War I, World War II, the third and fourth Diadochi, and how that all applies to our time. And Lord, as we can see, and first of all, I just want to say, so thank you, Lord. You're opening up our eyes to the history that's taking place in the present time by showing us what has happened in the past. So we don't have to have this knee-jerk reaction to all these things that are happening to the world. We know because you have shown us, and you have promised that nothing happens without you first telling your prophets. And so your messengers have been teaching us, Lord, of the things that are going to happen. And you have shown them painstakingly, all the things that has happened, even way back as over 273 BCs ago. And now things are coming into fruition. We can understand it. We can understand it better. We can understand the King of the North, King of the South, what they're doing, the papacy, the counterfeit line, what's going on there, having a little hint, though we don't know all what it looks like. So I just want to thank you, Lord, for not keeping us in the dark. And we don't have to have a knee-jerk reaction to all these events that are happening. So thank you for the studies tonight. And thank you for the presentation. Thank you for Elaine for bringing this study together. There's still little questions to be answered. But we're just grateful on how you lead us. So as we are living in a historical time in our lives, or maybe not take this time of peace for granted, but maybe review, and so that we can see more clearly of the things that are coming, and maybe also study the methodology so we understand, because the time is coming closer and closer that when we are going to the relapse, it's just a matter of time. So I just pray that all of us will be ready, and because we're going to succeed, and we're going to get to see our great God come for us. So thank you, Lord. And may the Lord continue to protect us until we meet again Friday evening. Thank you, Lord. In Yeshua's wonderful name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Anybody that hangs on this far in the recording, watching it when we post it, I will update the notes on the website with the corrections that we were making notes of. So God bless you all.